Caitlin Clark has a lot of haters in the WNBA world, but her biggest hater is Sheryl Swoopes. And what separates her hate from the likes of Diana Taurasi and others is that most of them are just a little jealous about the attention that Clark is getting. But Sheryl Swoopes is different. She has some deep-rooted hatred in her heart towards Caitlin Clark, and nobody knows exactly why and what motivates her. To try and get to the bottom of this, I did a bunch of research going back to the very beginning, and I found the secret reason Swoopes has been hating on Clark all this time. Watch this video till the end and it'll make sense. It's important to understand that Sheryl Swoopes is considered one of the greatest women's basketball players of all time. Her WNBA resume is extraordinary. 4 titles, 3 MVPs, 3 Defensive Player of the Years and 2 scoring titles. She also won 3 Olympic gold medals with Team USA. But before all of that, she was one of the greatest college players of all time. And college is where everything starts. In her senior year at Texas Tech, Sheryl Swoopes had one of the greatest scoring seasons in NCAA history. She averaged 28.1 points per game and scored 955 points, which was the most ever from a guard. Now, several guards have come along and broke that record since, but the one person Sheryl Swoopes seemed to have a problem with was Caitlin Clark. And this started back in 2023 before the Caitlin Clark effect really took off. Clark made history, breaking the record for most points scored in a single NCAA tournament with 191 points, surpassing Sheryl Swoopes, who'd held the record for 30 years. But instead of congratulating Caitlin for her accomplishment and being proud of the fact that her record stood the test of time and somebody was finally able to best it, Sheryl took a different approach.
I set the record in 5 games, right?
Yeah.
Because back then, we had a first round bye.
Oh,
so
okay.
we didn't get to play, I didn't get that 6 games. So I set the record in 5 games.
Yeah.
So to me, yes, she broke the record, but she did it in 6 games.
It took her an extra game.
Well, I'm just saying.
Now, she does have a point here, but the point doesn't need to be made. Because if the debate was who had the greater NCAA tournament run, then people would bring up the fact that Swoopes averaged more points, but also, more importantly, the fact that she set the record and won the championship, scoring 47 points in the final, while Clark lost to LSU. But nobody was comparing the two. They were simply pointing out the fact that Caitlin Clark scored more points in an NCAA tournament than any other player in history. Now, these comments from 2023 became relevant again in 2024, because Sheryl Swoopes went viral again for her take on Gil's Arena after Caitlin Clark surpassed the NCAA's all-time scoring record.
Caitlin Clark right now probably takes about 40 shots a game. You have a 25-year-old playing against a 20-year-old. Like, you should be killing them. Yeah. If Kelsey Plum set that record in 4 years, well, Caitlin should have broke that record in 4 years. But because there's a COVID year and then there's another year, you know what I mean? So she's already had an extra year to break that record. So is it truly a broken record?
This was one of the worst takes in basketball history. She completely lied about Caitlin Clark's age. She said she was 25 when she was 22, said she played extra years in college when she played 4, just as many as anyone else. She said she takes 40 shots per game. She averaged 20 shots per game at Iowa, which is literally half. She also said Kelsey Plum should have the record because she did it in less time, when both Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Plum played 139 games in college, and Clark broke the record in 126 games, which is actually less time than Kelsey Plum. But the craziest thing about all of this is she made all of this up about Clark's age and Kelsey Plum just so she can drive home the point that in order for a record to be broken, it has to be done in the same amount of time as it was set, because she can't get over the fact that Caitlin Clark scored more points than her in March Madness. Because of that, she wants to change the entire meaning of what breaking a record is. You will notice throughout this video that trying to change a very simple and commonly understood concept is something Sheryl Swoopes is willing to do a lot before admitting she's wrong. Speaking of her being wrong, here's a great example. During the Final Four, Connecticut Sun guard Dejanay Carrington, who famously poked Caitlin Clark in the eye during the WNBA playoffs, tweeted out that Caitlin might lead the league in assists this year. Her teammate Alyssa Thomas, who just broke the WNBA's single-season assist record, responded to that saying, "Don't play with me." Sheryl Swoopes joined in on the action, laughing at the idea that Clark could average more assists than Thomas, and then a year later, after it happened, Swoopes tried to deny that any of this was even said.
Carrington said, "Hey, listen up, ladies." Who?
How,
Carrington.
But time out. No.
Listen up, ladies.
Make sure you get the tweet right.
She might lead the league.
That ain't what she said. That ain't what she said.
What did she say?
That ain't what
Caitlin
she
Clark just might lead the league.
said. That ain't what she said.
So that wasn't a,
time out.
that wasn't an
what she
ex. So that means she's seen this
No,
coming then.
but
A
listen,
passing.
But that's not what she said.
What'd she say?
So to keep you up to speed with the timeline, towards the end of Clark's college career, Hawkeyes fans started to wear Don't Be a Sheryl shirts. Then people started making Be a Sheryl shirts that Angel Reese and other WNBA people of high profile got behind and endorsed. And by this point there was obvious animosity between Sheryl Swoopes and Caitlin Clark fans. And Sheryl ruffled even more feathers when she accused Caitlin Clark of being a bully on Gil's Arena again at the very start of the season.
I mean, if you want to talk about bullies, we can talk about every time Caitlin has the ball, she pushes off.
Oh, no.
Now what Sheryl doesn't seem to understand here is Gil referring to Angel as a bully was not a personal jab. He wasn't describing her character, he was highlighting the fact that she overpowers players with her physicality, and that's partially why she's so dominant. She's bigger, she's stronger, and she bullies her opponents. But Sheryl Swoopes doesn't think the tallest player on the court who dominates the paint is worthy of being a bully, but the small guard who occasionally pushes off to create separation, just like her good friend Michael Jordan did, is the one more fitting of being called a bully. But then guess what? She turns around and says that she never even called Caitlin Clark a bully, because she doesn't seem to understand that anything you say on camera in the public eye, we are going to have proof of. But as the WNBA season started, Sheryl Swoopes kept talking and tried to make a point right here about the selective media coverage as it pertains to quote basketball plays being overblown as personal attacks from the media.
It was that important to you to run the Kennedy Carter hip check, right? That was everywhere. But yet, you didn't even discuss what Alyssa Thomas did to Angel Reese.
Well, first of all, the Angel Reese foul was a one-off, and Alyssa Thomas was rightfully ejected for it. What isn't a one-off is the fact that 20% of the WNBA's entire flagrant fouls last season were on Caitlin Clark. That clearly shows that players are intentionally out to hurt her. Secondly, the Kennedy Carter incident was personal. Not only did she say this in a post-game interview,
Yeah, I ain't answering no Caitlin Clark questions.
but she also tweeted out that Caitlin doesn't bring anything to the table other than three-point shooting, which is kind of comical now, seeing as she broke pretty much every assist record, but those two are incomparable situations. Kennedy Carter has a reputation for targeting and cheap-shotting players. It's no coincidence that Marina Mabury requested a trade mid-season, and when she played against the Chicago Sky for the first time, Kennedy Carter did this.
Mabury hits her with a pump fake. And
Speaking of those two players, the next time Sheryl Swoopes disrespected CC was when discussing the Rookie of the Year race. You won't be surprised to hear that when asked who she'd vote for, she chose Angel Reese over Caitlin Clark. But that's not the issue, because at the time of that episode, a lot of people felt the same way. What was crazy was her reasoning.
I don't know if Chicago's in the playoffs right now without Angel. Right?
Yeah.
Is Indiana, excuse me, is Indiana in the playoffs right now without Caitlin? I don't
No. Last year, no.
Well, but they were close, right? But when you look at the overall team, like the pieces that they have, without question, Indiana has better players than Chicago from top to bottom.
So basically what she tried to do was downplay Caitlin Clark's individual impact for her team, and saying that with or without her, the Fever would be a playoff team and what she's doing she's supposed to do, while Angel Reese elevated a Chicago Sky team with considerably less talent. First of all, the Indiana Fever hadn't made the playoffs since 2016, nor had they had an above 500 record during that time period. They were drafting number 1 overall back-to-back years, so to say that without Caitlin they would have still been a playoff team? What are you basing that off? All the other Fever players that she mentioned were there before and the team didn't make the playoffs. Chicago actually won more games than Indiana last season. This year the Fever got better and the Sky got worse. So to say that the Fever were way more talented than Chicago and that Angel was elevating a bad team while Caitlin was a part of an already good team is simply not true. Even when comparing the two teams, excluding Angel and Clark who cancel each other out, you've got Aaliyah Boston and Camila Cardoso. Right now Boston is better, but she's a year older. They both played at South Carolina, both won championships, were both top picks, and are both going to be among the best bigs in the WNBA for a long time. Indiana has Kelsey Mitchell, the Sky have Kennedy Carter. Again, similar profile of player. Two of the fastest combo guards in the WNBA, both certified bucket getters. The first half of the season people would have said Carter is better. Post All-Star break you're going to pick Kelsey Mitchell. At the time of this podcast, the Chicago Sky still had Marina Mabury, who's been one of the best players in the WNBA playoffs. Ever since she left, Chicago's fell apart. Katie Lou Samuelson was supposed to be that type of player for the Fever, but she hasn't been that at all. She averaged 4 points per game for Indiana. So the fact that Sheryl Swoopes even tried to suggest that Katie Lou has been more valuable to the Fever's success this season than Caitlin Clark is not even delusional, it's just false. And the truth is, on paper, there really isn't much in it between the two teams, and the difference between them is that the Fever have Caitlin Clark and the Sky don't. If you were to put Clark on the Sky, they make the playoffs. But if you were to put Reese on the Fever without a point guard, it's the same thing as Chicago. Two dominant bigs, a score-first two guard, and no floor general. But this idea that Caitlin was just another player on a good team is something that Sheryl Swoopes continued to push, because post All-Star break when the Fever started winning games, Swoopes talked about the difference and gave everybody credit except one person.
I think the Olympic break really helped Indiana.
Absolutely.
Like, they look like they've spent time, whether they took time off or not, but they worked on stuff. I'm going to say shout out to Lexi Hull. I'm a big Lexi Hull fan. Watch her in AU. Lexi Hull shot the leather off the ball in their game against Seattle. Kelsey Mitchell is just stroking. She is just shooting the basketball. Aaliyah Boston, almost a triple-double. I know we're talking about teams where they can move and things changing, but if Indiana continues to play the way they're playing like this, they too are going to move up in the standings.
Yes, Sheryl Swoopes is absolutely correct. The Fever were a better team after the All-Star break. Lexi Hull did find a role and started shooting a lot better. Aaliyah Boston definitely got better as the season went on, and Kelsey Mitchell as the best scoring guard since the restart was phenomenal. The whole team got better, but so did Caitlin Clark. She was Player of the Month and Player of the Week several times. She became undeniably the best guard in the WNBA in the second half of the season. So how do you not mention her when talking about the Fever's success? You can show love to other players while at the same time giving Clark her flowers. She didn't do that, and she refuses to do that. And another example of this came when she called the Dallas Wings game as a commentator. The broadcast took a moment to talk about the WNBA's Player of the Week winners. Caitlin Clark was one of them, and instead of using that as an opportunity to give Caitlin her flowers and credit her, Swoopes said this.
And they're the next two opponents to the Wings. Caitlin Clark will be here on Sunday for the week, averaged 25, and Avisa Collier averaged over 25. And of course the Lynx here Friday at 6:30 on Ion. And then the Fever come here at 3 o'clock before a sellout crowd. Tough stretch for Dallas.
Nothing. She didn't say anything. Spectators were left with an awkward silence of dead air on the live broadcast, all because Sheryl Swoopes could not bring herself to credit Caitlin Clark. And by this point, people started to notice that something was going on. The fans had been screaming for months, but the mainstream media finally caught on to this situation, and Stephen A. Smith finally called her out, which led to a back and forth.
Respectfully, Sheryl Swoopes, you have any idea how that makes you look? You have any idea how that serves to stain any kind of critique of Caitlin Clark, because that gives fodder to those who believe she's being hated on and ostracized to some degree? Do you realize that, Sheryl Swoopes, you're insane to do that? Let me tell you why you're insane to do that. Because, Sheryl Swoopes, you're one of the greatest players ever in the history of basketball. That's why. See, you won a championship in college at Texas Tech. You won 3 Olympic gold medals. You won 4 WNBA championships. You know basketball. You know basketball better than me. You know basketball than any of the pundits. You know basketball better than most of the men that play basketball. There is no way in hell you just accidentally left Caitlin Clark's name out of that soliloquy that you dropped about the Indiana Fever. Stop it. You know that. Stop it.
By this point, everybody with common sense knew what was going on. A WNBA legend was blatantly hating on a young upcoming superstar. And with the Indiana Fever set to play the Dallas Wings in Dallas, everybody was tuning in for not just the game, but for the broadcast. Because Sheryl Swoopes covers Dallas Wings games, and people wanted to hear what she would say about Caitlin Clark. The Fever won that game. Clark set a career high. She scored 35 points in a must-watch game that went down to the wire. And guess what? Sheryl Swoopes was nowhere to be found. Some people say she skipped the broadcast, others say she was removed. She says she wasn't contracted to cover it. Whatever the reasoning was, I don't think it's a coincidence that she wasn't there to cover the one game involving that player with everything that was going on. Now this right here is where things reach pathetic levels of immaturity. So in Swoopes' place on the broadcast, WNBA legend Nancy Lieberman stepped in to replace Sheryl, and she made a conscious effort to show appreciation to Caitlin during the broadcast to highlight the positives she has done for the game.
As a baller to a baller, I just want to say thank you to you, Caitlin Clark.
Absolutely.
For just lifting our game up, you and so many great players. But what you're doing, you're going to make all these women multimillionaires one day, like Tiger did, like Michael Jordan did. And we shouldn't hate on her. We should celebrate her, not tolerate her.
Now Nancy Lieberman and Sheryl Swoopes have had a great relationship for a long time. So much so that Sheryl even brought her on stage and said this about her during her Hall of Fame speech.
Nancy, I'm honored to have you here. You're such an inspiration to me and so many others. You were my first basketball role model, someone I tried to emulate. Your commitment to the game is unwavering, and I love the fact that you're still breaking down barriers in your role as an assistant coach with the Sacramento Kings.
Understand how close these two are. And now listen to what Nancy Lieberman said on the Stephen A. Smith show after a few months ago she reached out to Sheryl as a friend to speak to her about the Caitlin Clark controversy.
And I called her as a friend and I said, you know, you can say whatever you want. You can have your own opinion about anybody, but you do have to get the statistics right. I mean, facts matter. And well, she got upset with me on the phone, and I was like, Sheryl, you know, I'm not doing anything to hurt you. I'm just sharing. We're talking. And so our relationship it pretty much is not happening at this point. I tried to talk to her at the Final Four. Right. She didn't want to talk to me. My life's going to be good or great with or without Sheryl Swoopes in my life. I'd rather have her in it.
Remember what Sheryl Swoopes said about Nancy Lieberman. She once held her in such high regard that in one of the biggest moments of her life she chose to share it with her. But now, this Caitlin Clark stuff is so deep to Sheryl Swoopes that at her big and mature age, she's willing to cut her off, and the two are no longer on speaking terms and may never be again. Because Sheryl Swoopes responded to Nancy Lieberman calling her a liar. Bear in mind, the only thing that Nancy did and advised her to do was to apologise in the same place she made her comments in the first place, publicly for everybody to hear. I think this situation right here just highlights how low Sheryl Swoopes is willing to go to diminish Caitlin Clark. She's willing to throw away relationships with people important to her, and I didn't think it could possibly get any lower than this. But Sheryl Swoopes topped herself again. She just won't shut up and digs a deeper hole every time. And when she returned to the Gills Arena podcast, she cemented herself as a generational hater.
There's a lot of other shit going on that players are like, this ain't where I want to be.
Over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Despite the Indiana Fever playing some of the best basketball in the entire WNBA at the time of this recording, Swoopes found a way to be negative and said that there's players, important ones on the Fever, that don't want to be on the team. This was a blatant attempt to disrupt and break up the Fever, trying to create tension in the locker room, having the players looking over their shoulder trying to figure out who's saying what to who and who secretly got a problem with who. It was so bad and created such a problem internally that the Fever players had to actually come out and debunk these statements and reassure the media that everything was good with the team internally.
All we do is have fun. With Caitlin Clark, who never takes anything serious, like I tell people all the time, she's really a kid at heart.
I think the reality of it is that I don't think people would know what I see squared, so shout out to Caitlin. That's just the reality. I think she's done an unbelievable job of bringing, you know, obviously her own fans and people that support her, but I embrace it from a standpoint of like people not, you know, guaranteed to see me play, and now that they do, I just hope I do right by it.
You know, like you never get used to it. Just always showing up and playing in front of sold out crowds. And I mean, shout out Caitlin. Shout out Caitlin. We appreciate her for this.
Even if it was true, the fact that she's brought something like this up during the season with this team trying to compete for a championship in the playoffs is actually incredibly selfish. Because hating and talking down upon someone is one thing, but trying to ruin and disrupt a good thing that they have going on, that crosses a line. And if you don't already think this has long surpassed Skip Bayless and LeBron James hating levels, check this out. Instead of just admitting that she was wrong when earlier in the year she said this about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese dominating.
So will Caitlin Clark be a good pro? Absolutely. Will Caitlin Clark come into the WNBA and do what she's doing right now? Immediately? Absolutely not. Not gonna happen.
Okay.
She could have easily turned around and said, both Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese have done an incredible job and they were even better than I thought they'd be. That's all she needed to say. But instead she would rather change the definition of what it means to dominate basketball. Because Sheryl Swoopes insists that Caitlin Clark was not dominant in her rookie season, despite leading the WNBA in both assists and 3-pointers made, as well as being top 10 in scoring and leading her team to the playoffs for the first time in a decade.
20 points, 8.4 assists, 6 rebounds.
That's crazy.
But to me, that's not dominating.
Yeah, it's only not dominating because she's a rookie.
Because I know people are like, oh my God, you said she wouldn't be good. But I didn't say she wouldn't be good. What I said was I didn't think Caitlin or Angel would come into the league and dominate immediately, which I don't think either of them did.
According to her, that is not dominating because Caitlin averaged 30 in college and only averaged 19 in the NBA. Does that mean nobody's dominant? Because no player has ever averaged 30 a game in the WNBA. A'ja Wilson just broke the scoring record this year and she averaged 26. Now this right here is where things get really interesting, because Sheryl Swoopes averaged 28 points per game her senior year in college, Caitlin averaged 30 points, and she acknowledges that Clark was a dominant college player. But when you compare Caitlin Clark's rookie stats to Sheryl Swoopes' 3 MVP seasons, the stats are actually very comparable. You could argue Clark's are actually better, and this right here would be a massive gotcha moment to Sheryl Swoopes, because if Caitlin Clark isn't dominating with these numbers, that means Swoopes would have to admit that she wasn't dominant too. Well, instead of just admitting she was wrong and Caitlin's better than she thought, she's actually willing to do that and lie about her own career.
So 3 WNBA MVPs in your career, would you consider each of those 3 seasons as dominant seasons for yourself?
No.
Sheryl Swoopes would actually rather belittle and downplay her historically great MVP seasons than just admit that Caitlin Clark was dominant this past season. Do you know how ridiculous it is for Sheryl Swoopes to say this about herself? In the year 2000, Swoopes averaged 20.7 points per game, leading the league in scoring. She averaged 2.8 steals, led the league in steals, won Defensive Player of the Year, she averaged 6.3 rebounds, was MVP of the league, and also won the WNBA championship. She is the only WNBA player ever to win MVP and Defensive Player of the Year in the same season. She's done it twice. By every definition of the word, she was dominating. She dominated offensively, she dominated defensively, she dominated statistically, she dominated the competition by winning. She was absolutely undeniably dominant in those years, and for her to say that she wasn't dominant is basically a way of telling Caitlin Clark and any other WNBA guard that it's impossible to be dominant from that position, because nobody will probably ever do what she did, especially on both ends of the floor. And this is how you know she's lying, because when she was asked if it wasn't her then who did dominate, she didn't have an answer.
Okay. See, well, we need perspective in life.
No.
So you were the best player in the W, but you don't think...
But I don't think I dominated.
Who dominated?
I thought, I don't know.
So nobody dominated? She can't come up with another name because she knows fine well she dominated. She was the best two-way player in the league and won the title. How could anyone else have possibly dominated when she was winning all the titles and accolades? But apparently it's just impossible for any guard to ever dominate in the WNBA, and both Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, despite breaking all-time records in major statistical categories, they didn't dominate just because Sheryl Swoopes would rather redefine what we understand dominating to be, just so she doesn't have to admit she was wrong. She'd rather tear down not just her own legacy, but the legacy of every other great WNBA guard ever, than just admit that Caitlin Clark was dominant. We have never seen hating of this sort ever. So if you've made it up to this point in the video, you're probably baffled and wondering, what has Caitlin Clark done for Sheryl Swoopes to hate her this much? Well, I think we have our answer. Because it's just been announced that Sheryl Swoopes has signed a major deal to host a new women's sports series that debuts October 10th. And I think this explains the real reason why Swoopes has been as critical of Clark as she has been. She wants a career in the media space. That's why she does these podcast appearances. If she didn't want the backlash, she wouldn't say the things she does about Caitlin Clark. But she continues to do it, and it's clearly working for her. And just like Skip Bayless rose to the top of the sports media industry, hating on everything LeBron James did, Sheryl Swoopes seems to be doing the same with Caitlin Clark. For as great a basketball player as Sheryl Swoopes was, she's probably never been as relevant and talked about as she is right now. I think she knows exactly what she's doing. She's trying to climb to the top of the media industry off of Caitlin's name, and for as long as people continue to give it attention, she's gonna continue to do it and will make a lot of money while doing so. But let me know your thoughts and feedback down below in the comments. Why do you think Sheryl Swoopes hates on Caitlin Clark? Is she jealous? Is she trying to make a career of her? Or is it a bit of both? Click the middle of your screen right now and I will convince you why Caitlin Clark deserved to win MVP over A'ja Wilson. You're going to enjoy that video. And on that note, it's DKM signing out until next time, and peace.